initially?
I'm not sure. I'm obsessed with band names. I think I talk about this a lot. I think my perfect band name is Blur, actually, because
Mm,
it needs to be easy. It needs to be unspellable, unspellable, misspellable. So you need to be able
mm,
to spell it whatever country you're in. It needs to be one thing, and it needs to not give you any concept of what the band's going to be to put you off. Like my first band, we nearly called it Pelvic Thrust, and that would just been
Mhm.
like dead in the water. There's no
it was
way
Hang
anyone
David,
would
wasn't
listen
it?
to it. It was Hang David was the actual one, which again was a terrible fucking name, but
Is it?
yes, I think it is. I think any just one word names. There's no great two name bands, I think, but we can discuss that. But I'm not sure.
Do you mean that
Pulp,
Leonard Skinner is
Blur,
not a good band name?
Lynyrd Skynyrd.
It's the worst band name
It's
of
a
all
terrible name,
time.
and also it's so not them.
No.
Like it sounds like they've listened to something foreign and tried to write it
Mm,
down phonetically.
it really, really hasn't worked. Speaking of Blur, you gave Alex James the name for his book, right?
Fuck me, you've done research. Yes, I'm actually. It's one of my.
that's my job. I'm afraid I'm a
It,
researcher.
it's one of my proudest moments. Actually, I met one of the weird things about when you become famous, as I did for a bit. You kind of you suddenly realize that you meet people you really like, and you think, fuck, they know who I am. And I remember meeting Alex and Blur, and I was a massive Blur fan, and he just like, all right, mate. And I said, yeah, all right, mate. We just there's no like pre-chat, it's just straight in. And I remember just thinking, I'm trying to be normal here, but like 3 years ago, I just queued around fucking Soho Square for 6 hours to get into one of your gigs. This isn't a normal thing. But then I started to know him because we wrote for the Independent together, and he told me, he said, "Oh yeah, just written a book, mate, about being in the band and stuff." And I said, "Have you got a name for it?" He said, "No." And I go, "Bit of a blur." He goes, "Thank you, I'll have that."
And he
So
didn't
yeah,
credit you, did he?
huh?
He didn't credit you, did he?
No, but that's fine. It's all right. I know.
You
I
know what
think
they say, Dom? Eaten bread is soon forgotten.
It's absolutely 100%.
I think the Girls and Boys bass line is, I think it's up there with the 90s bass lines ever.
I agree. I mean, I
It
never really
really pops.
noticed bass, but I like unapologetic rock stars. I don't like rock stars that. I mean, Alex is going a little bit that way now with his cheese and stuff like that. But
Mm,
he
Is his
just
cheese any
fucking.
good?
Well, he doesn't make the cheese. That's the thing. He
Ah,
actually just has people who rent bits of his farm off him and make the cheese. And then he
Iggy does
tried his
dairy.
he tried his expression "cheese is the new rock and roll," and it's a bit weird. I went to his farm, and it was all very country house. Actually, he had his kind
Mm.
of quad bike, which is what everyone has when they get down to the country. And I thought he'd kill himself. And we wandered around, and we went into a barn, and there was just this dead sheep surrounded by very alive lambs. And he said, "Oh, that's not supposed to be there." And I just thought, yeah, this is not really a professional farm. It was all a bit odd. That's a wedgie invite if I've ever heard it.
Did you both find that you named your children carefully?
No, I'd made a terrible mistake, but I'm presuming you know your research because I tell this story a lot. But I called my kid Parker because I wanted a really strong kind of, not because I'm, gender aware, but I just wanted a strong kind of multi-sex uh,
Mm.
name, Parker Joly. I just thought that was great. And then 3 days after she was born, I had Cockney builders in, which is not a euphemism, and and she was and they were at home in London, and the builder said, "Is that your daughter there called Parker?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "So she's called Parker Joly?" I go, "Yeah, that's how it works." And he goes, "Because you know what I'd do if I Parker Joly?" I go, "No." He goes, "Well, I go and have a dump, don't I?" And I was like, "What?" I thought, "Fuck, have I named my kid after a Cockney rhyming tone for having a shit?" I think he was taking the piss because I've never heard it again. But actually, it could have gone terribly. If she had a huge nose, she'd be Nosy Parker. If she went fat, she'd be Porker. Like it's a minefield, but she's fine.
But then your other son is Jackson, right?
Yeah, my only son. Yeah,
After Pollock.
interesting. Yes. So Parker, I told everyone was Dorothy Parker, Charlie Parker, all that shit. The
Yeah.
truth, genuinely, and not it's not even Parker from Thunderbirds. I went round to a friend's flat when Stacey was pregnant, and they had a cat called Parker. I just thought it was such a cool name.
no, my daughter's called Biddy, which is a quintessential old school Irish name.
Biddy,
And yeah,
like an old
Biddy.
biddy.
Yeah.
Really, I
But
love that.
it was kind of accidental because I originally we didn't know if she was going to be a boy or a girl, and at the time, like I listened to a lot of Rory Gallagher, and and myself and my ex were thinking, oh yeah, maybe Rory, which also means Red King in Irish. So I was like, yeah, likelihood they might
Ginger
have
King,
some.
that's what we want. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Strong lineage.
Yeah.
And yeah, what happened is she when we went for the first scan, the midwife knew the sex, and I was like, well, she obviously seen something instead of nothing. But
Yeah.
it turns out the other way around. I don't know how she managed to check that out and confirm that. So we didn't want to know the sex of the child, and when she was born, I was like, wow, this. I wasn't expecting this, but we used to call her itty bitty baby, and then just Biddy. So I was like, well, we've been calling her Biddy all throughout the pregnancy, and my great grandmother was Biddy Maloney as well. So, and it
That
also
B-I-double-D-Y or B-I-D-I?
yeah, Biddy.
It's old Biddy. I love that. She's young
Yeah,
Biddy and she's old Biddy. It's fine.
and she does have an old soul to her. She's
I love
just
that.
turned 11, but definitely got some of that ancestral.
Is she half Swedish?
She is, yeah. So she's half Swedish, half Irish. And
Do
this
you
is
find any
Jane.
linkage between Swedes and Irish? Like, is there a Viking?
Well, there was
Depression, maybe.
Because the Irish, you've more got armadas crashing onto your side on one side. That's where the dark skins meet the gingers
yeah.
in naval invasions.
And apparently, I remember reading once that the Vikings brought trousers to Ireland.
What? That's a great
Yeah.
fact.
Yeah, these are the kind of things that get lodged in there.
What were you wearing before? I used to listen to Peter Cook when I was. I can't go to sleep without listening to something.
No, I'm the same. Yeah, I'm the same.
So I listen to LBC all night now, except I have to turn it off before that weird moron comes on at 4 a.m. But I used to listen to it way back when I was at school, and Peter Cook used to ring up, I think,
Yeah, he was.
as a Norwegian fisherman, one of them actually, and that's exactly the sort of shit that he would say. It was fantastic.
In fact, there's a great thing with Chris Morris and Peter Cook, which no one seems to know about really, called Why Bother. And it's this great thing. It's on YouTube, and it's them improvising for hours.
Oh, I'd love that.
And it's on YouTube. No one I know has, and no one will listen to it when I tell them.
I would definitely listen to that. Victor Smith just died, and
he just died.
Yeah, and he was a real hero of mine. And I mean, mainly because he wrote a very first review of Trigger Happy TV and said, without doubt, the greatest show of the millennium. Now, admittedly, this was the 14th January 2000, but I take it, and it gets better. I used to listen to all his funny phone calls, and a lot of influences on me. But there's a famous phone call where he rang Princess Diana pretending to be Stephen Hawking with the voice. He talked to her for an hour, and I can't find it. Like, it's supposed to have been leaked onto YouTube, but I can't find it.
Did you enjoy TV Offal, Dom?
Oh, I love TV Offal so much. Yeah,
I love Daleks.
Yeah,
they exterminate. Better watch your back.
And the real obituaries were just fantastic.
Oh yeah. What was the other
Jeremy
one?
Beadle one was fantastic.
Oh, Jeremy Beadle.
You're betting.
And he had like the two handprints.
Yeah.
There was the assassination of the week. Did they live or are they worm food?
He was amazing. I had his nuisance calls. Like I used to listen to 2 sets of nuisance calls that weirdly I didn't turn into phone jacker, but they did influence Trigger Happy. I used to listen to the Jerky Boys and Victor Smith in the 90s.
Should I bring my fucking tools?
Yeah. Oh my God, you know them. That's amazing.
That's actually what started us off. Was listen to the Jerky Boys, and then we were doing like prank phone calls to like old bullies from school and then random people.
I didn't know anyone listened to the Jerky Boys, except a lot of people name their albums. Like Radiohead's first album, Pablo Honey, was a Jerky Boys reference. A lot of bands used to listen to Jerky Boys and stuff. Do you know the story behind the Jerky Boys? I found out they used to work in the press office of MTV in New York. And then they used to get all the numbers of people through because they had access, and they just used to do all their stuff. They made a very small film that I have to admit, Sam and I watched, and it never got anywhere, but we nicked a couple of the ideas. We nicked the idea of using the tannoy in a supermarket and getting people like saying so-and-so has come in, but we did it a lot better. But yeah, so I have to admit, I nicked some stuff with Jerky Boys, but I'm obsessed with them. I always feel guilty because it's weird, because I feel guilty because I am using people, but they're not recognizable. But just the power of just sitting in front of a telephone and thinking, I can literally ring anyone in the fucking world. I can ring a KFC in New Orleans. I like your cat. Nice pussy. And
That's James.
lovely. I love that.
Named
My
after
dog's
James.
not in here at the moment, but no, I love that. My favorite one, if I'm going to blow up my own stuff, is can I speak to the Gary of the house? Because there's just something very weird about that. But yeah, no, bits of it was hit and miss, but I loved it.
Well, I think it was trying to break new ground, though. I mean, like,
yeah, but I got no backing. It was an audible thing where they were throwing money at everyone, but without any idea what they wanted, and it kind of fell between two stools. They wanted audible exclusives, but this was more weird comedy, and they didn't really know what they were doing. It was when podcasts, it was when audiobook, after Serial and those kind of massive podcasts that exploded, suddenly Audible thought, fuck, we've got like a Spotify for that. And they didn't really know what they wanted. So they just threw money at people. Not they threw a lot of money at me, and they let you do what you want. But then when it got there, someone smart should have said, great, I love this. Let's go that way. And we had no direction. And I'm very bad at aftercare. I just do it and have fun and then fuck it, you know. But it was fun.
But I thought the idea that it didn't have direction in that sense just made it an exercise in let's see how much mental illness we can impose. But I think, do you think it works on English people more? Because one thing I've noticed is my wife lived in London for years, and she said, like, there are some things that work, like Peep Show works in London because there are just people who are mental. So it makes sense in context because people encounter lunatics.
It's interesting that I'd agree with you totally on that. And yet, Trigger Happy works around the world. Whereas to me, Trigger Happy was specifically English, British. I didn't think about it at the time, but it was. You know, like the whole concept of, if I'd have done the big mobile as I did in America, you just someone would punch you in the face.
Yeah.
So we went to the Empire State Building, and we just, you know, my whole live tour is about blagging free travel, and that's everything I do is about blagging free travel. And with Trigger Happy, we just thought, fuck, they'll send us to New York. So we went to New York. We had no plans at all. And I think we shot about 4 minutes worth when we were in New York. But the one thing we did do is we went up the Empire State Building and we did one of the spy swaps. And yeah, I got fucking arrested, but I managed to, the cameraman, Sam, got away, and then he got arrested. He passed the tape to our runner who just disappeared. And then, yeah, we were put in this weird little prison. There's a little holding cell at the top of the Empire State Building. And then they weren't quite, this was luckily just before 9/11. So they weren't quite sure what crime we'd.
Yeah, I was about to ask, was it post or pre 9/11?
No, well, actually, I went back to, it's so funny because that one was pre 9/11 and, you know, they didn't give a shit. And then literally, it must be very similar with the Irish, actually, after all the troubles, and suddenly going to England on the ferry must have been suddenly very different, because literally a year later I went to New York with the big mobile to do some special thing. And first they just looked at my passport. It's like born in Beirut, went to school with Osama bin Laden, looked at my visas, looked me up online, comedy terrorist, and then asked me to turn the big mobile on to prove it worked. I went, it doesn't. It was not good.
I think some of my favorite jokes ever, I think it's because of the expense, is those opening sequences to World Shut Your Mouth, which is the biggest fuck you to taxpayers' money. It's the most punk thing I've ever seen.
Well, firstly, it's license fee payers' money, to be fair, but
okay.
I think World Shut Your Mouth is my greatest moment, but it was all done on the wrong channels. Like World Shut Your Mouth should have been Channel 4. Trigger Happy would have worked on BBC. You know, like there was no planning to it. But my ethos in comedy, I've realized, because I've been touring this show, trying to explain to people why you know me as a squirrel, but I'm traveling around North Korea. And to me, it all makes sense, but not to anyone else. And I think it comes down to this. If I had to describe what comedy is to me, what makes me laugh, and there's a little bit of Dennis Pennis in this. He put a big statement down before he did what he did. But for me, it's what makes me laugh is making an enormous effort and traveling vast distances to do something totally pointless. That literally is me. And in World Shut Your Mouth, I went all the way to Newfoundland just to frighten an Eskimo, to creep up behind someone ice fishing, hit some cymbals, he jumps, and then we just fucked off back to England. And it's utterly pointless, but it's still the best.
So what else did you do when you were there?
Nothing.
So you just went.
That was the whole reason. Because to me, we called it for the beauty. It was like, normally if you go abroad to do something, then to make it worthwhile, you have to film lots of stuff to give it production values. To me, it was like, no, this needs to be pure. We have to go all the way there just to do that and film nothing else. That's all we did. I remember when we landed in Newfoundland, the immigration guy goes, "Welcome to Canada. What's your reason for visiting Newfoundland?" And I just had that moment where I said, "I'm here to frighten an Eskimo." And he didn't bat an eyelid. And he just said, "I'm afraid we have no Eskimoi," which is the plural, "here on the island." And I was like, fuck, I should have done my research. But you know what? We cracked on.
But did you do it? Did you like spend a couple of days there, like restaurants and
yeah, we went to
sightseeing?
St. John's. We got drunk in St. John's, and then we drove out for like 5 hours. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Crew were getting a bit weird, and then I just came over the hill, saw this massive frozen lake. There was a guy in the middle who, if not an Eskimo, looked positively Eskimo-esque, and he was ice fishing. And I had some symbols, so we set up. I crawled, did it, bang, just drove back, and then flew back. We were there 3 days.
And the Eskimo himself, did he chase you?
No, he just. I always feel a bit guilty because obviously normally.
I can imagine how he thought about that.
But I've thought about this for so long, like because normally I prefer to just do stuff and fuck off because I don't think we're not ruining people's lives. I like the weirdness of it, but normally because of consent forms, you have to then explain things to them. But in this case, because we're in the middle of nowhere, I felt there was probably an ice pick somewhere, and the guy was wearing a kind of Kenny from South Park hood, so he was unidentifiable. I thought the best thing was to fuck off, but I've always wondered what happened that night. Like I know I'm stereotyping vastly, and I shouldn't be using the word Eskimo, but it's a great word. But let's just say there was a Mrs. Eskimo, and that night he returned to an igloo where she's cooking seal pie or whatever, and he just throws his rod down, and she goes, "Good day," and he goes, "Fucking weird." You know what? It's so funny. I always describe what I do as punk, and yet I'm the most unpunk. Well, I'm punk in a funny sense because punk itself is shit. Like punk, punk everyone talks about it as though it's like this punk. We're all fuck. Punks are all middle class art students, and that's in a sense what I am. I'm not an art student, but so it's kind of easy to be punk if you're me. But punk is. I don't know. I love not knowing what the fuck I'm doing and getting away with it. And also, I have a skill set which is just making shit up, which is very unmonetizable. But I just know it's something I'm good at, and I can't do anything with it. So it's weird.
From a production point, or like when you're having meetings with executives and you're pitching ideas, it must be very frustrating if you can come up with ideas and you're given a budget, but then trying to justify the fact that you can come up with new content on the fly and very quickly.
It's an absolute nightmare. And of course, what happens is if you're flavor of the month, like once Trigger Happy had happened, for the next 3 years, I could get anything I wanted fucking commissioned. And of course, I got lazy, and you don't make your best stuff. When suddenly you can't get stuff commissioned, it fucking makes you hungry, and you really think about it. But the problem with what I do is I go into a commissioner, and he goes, "Well, what's the script?" I go, "Well, that's the thing. There's not really a script. You're going to have to trust me." Now, if I've just come off making Trigger Happy, they go, "Sure, you're a genius." But now they're like, "Oh, I'm not sure I can do that." So you have to go and just. So that's the punk bit. I now have to go and film my own stuff. So, I've just done a sequel to a show I did called Happy Hour, where I went around the world getting drunk. And my 18-year-old son, is frankly a stoner, but a nice stoner and sweet. And I suddenly thought, fuck, he's going off around the world on his gap year. And I always said that I'd make a show called Dom Joly's Bad Trips about drugs. So I jokingly pitched this show, which is basically me going on my son's gap year, and we look at drugs. And fucking Discovery loved it. So I've just yesterday had to film a teaser with me and my son driving around Cheltenham, listening to hits on the bong. I think it's going to get made. So yeah, I don't know what I'm doing with this, but it's all very odd.
Well, you know what? What a great memory for yourself and your son.
Very selfishly, I had a terrible relationship with my dad. I didn't have a relationship with him, and actually, we really get on, but we're distant because he's a teen and I'm a 55-year-old idiot. And I thought, actually, what an amazing way to like bond with your son at that age, to go off on that, like to have the opportunity to do that. So yeah, that is a very selfish element to it.
And also, you're very worldly. You've traveled the globe extensively. So I mean, like me, I have a son and a daughter, and I kind of find that unfortunately, like growing up, my dad wasn't around. I love him dearly, but we moved back to Ireland. He stayed in England, and there's a lot of things that when you look at people, you look at nuclear families that are still intact, and guys who had a father figure that was omnipresent, they learn so much more.
Do you
Whereas
think?
if your
Very
father's,
interesting. I
well,
think
it's just
the common denominator in almost every creative I know is that they didn't have a dad. I don't know what that is. So I'm trying to give my kids stability that I didn't have, but I slightly worry it'll make them really dull fucks. Like, you know, I
but
don't know.
but in some ways, I suppose if you don't have a dad around, I often think about this, that you know you tend to be quite wild and you make a lot more mistakes. But at the same time, it's through that baptism of fire in your teens and your 20s, and basically, you know, your mother can only do so much. And like I remember having uncles coming in lecturing me the whole time, and you know, and I guess they were trying to do me a favor, and you know, and I'd be like, yeah, yeah, you're right, yeah. I had one uncle telling me, you need to buy a site for a house now and get a job up there in the supermarket. And I was like, I want to buy it. Speaking of quad bikes earlier, I was like, yeah, I was like 16. I was like, I want to buy a quad bike. What are you talking about quad bikes for?
What
Get
is this
yourself.
fun bike?
Yeah, he was telling me as a 16-year-old to get a site and then build a house on the site
But that's what
and
I
then
did.
work in a supermarket. And I was like, why
I
the
mean,
fuck would I want to do that?
to be fair, with the building the house, he was probably right looking back
Yeah.
at it now with us all living like gypsies. But you know what? Yeah, it's very weird. I growing up, I just knew that my dad was a bit. I was really similar to my dad, but he was not a good dad. He was from like two generations back. He was emotionally crippled. So all I knew was that I didn't want to be like my dad was to me. Not that he was bad to me, but I wanted to be able to communicate with my kids more. And I
Yeah.
just thought, whatever happens, whatever my kids do, whether I disapprove of it or not, I want us to be able to talk about it. And I've done that. But all that means is you make other mistakes. It's like you don't make your dad's mistakes, you just make new mistakes. You're never going to be this perfect dad. I mean, it took me a long time when someone said dad for me to go, oh, me. Like, it's weird. Like, the concept that an idiot can be a father is weird.
Are you a morning person? Because like this one thing.
No,
It's an
no.
affliction for me.
It
Yeah.
drives me crazy. So my daughter is like doing neuroscience, and so she's all about circadian rhythms and all this shit. And I really think there's a thing. I definitely think as a teenager, you know, you don't get up till 4 in the afternoon, and I totally think your mind is different at that stage. And I do think there's a thing about that maybe moving. It seems that teenagers function on a different time frame to us, and maybe there is a good thing about moving school to start at 11 because that works and stuff.
They
And I
do that in
just
some
thought when I
places,
grow
actually.
up, I'll be getting up and you read, not that I read any of this shit, but you know, you go on TikTok or whatever, it's like every fucking internet.com cunt who's made loads of money. They're always like, what are your rules for life? Like, get up at 5, get up with the dawn. I'm like, fuck that. I can't function till 11. Like, that's it. I'm not up till 11. One of the main reasons I'm in telly is so I don't have to get up for 10 and I don't have to wear a suit. That's it.
Yeah, I
I
mean, it sounds like
yeah.
you're cut from the same cloth as myself.
Yeah.
Like
I think though
today,
Americans invented this stuff. I mean, the Puritan work ethic has just been has spilled into countries around the world. Like in LA, they get up at 4 in the morning, they go swimming. The idea of work as a virtue in and of itself is just insane to
and then
me.
they just sit in a
It,
cupboard with a flexi cable going, oh.
it really is. Actually, do you know what? The first time I went to LA, I kind of thought it was going to be all rock and roll because I went there, you know, on a roll. But actually, it was firstly the most horrific place I've ever been. But no one got pissed, or you know, I wasn't hanging out with John Belushi. No one was getting pissed or doing anything. It's because
Everyone
they
has
were
to
up so
drive.
fucking early, and I didn't understand why. And it's because all of them go to their therapists before they go to work, and I'm
Jeez.
like, fucking kill all that, you know. I hate
Yeah, I
it.
was disappointed
Yeah.
with Los Angeles. Well, I was and I wasn't. Like, I went to the Rainbow Bar thinking it was going to be like the music video to Guns N' Roses, Estranged. You know, I thought that still thought like, you know, Led Zeppelin groupies were going to be hanging out the Hyatt Hotel, and
They
you know,
were
I thought it was
underage.
It's different. But my first night in LA, I went to the Chateau Marmont. I stayed at the Chateau Marmont, and I went downstairs, and Johnny fucking Depp was sitting next on the table next to me and stuff. Which now I think is not very rock and roll, but at the time it's kind of what you wanted.
yeah,
But
exactly.
it felt almost like a theme park. It wasn't real. You know, I just don't like LA as a place. I don't like one career towns in general. Basically, I think it's always
Mm.
a mistake.
I think what happened was I have this theory that like when the pilgrims who obviously gave birth to all this stuff got to New York, manifest destiny made them cross, and the further across they got, the more insane they got. The point where
Because
they fell off into the Pacific Ocean from insanity.
The
well, I
frontiers.
also think, like, as you took your caravan wagon across, yeah, I mean, to decide to stop in Arkansas and think, yep, this is where I want to be. I mean, you've got to fucking hate it. The only people that made it across to California, as you said, were so either mental or driven that they didn't know what they were looking for. They were never going to be happy. And that's LA still like that. These are people who are never going to be happy.
It's a very good point, actually.
I'm quite pleased with that.
But could you imagine, like, staying in, imagine back in the day, people who just gave up in, like, Utah.
But they did. Utah, I'd understand giving up Utah. Because when they gave up in Utah, it wasn't fucking Mormons. It's just beautiful. But Arkansas, I've been, it's like swampland. And I think Arkansas was where they said, you know what? There's 3 caravans really fucking us off. We're just going to leave them here. Like, that's what happened.
And they were the ancestors of the Clintons.
100%.
But I just like the idea of, like, no, we can go further. But that's the whole idea that consumer capitalism is based off. There's more to be done. There's more growth. There's more progress.
Do you know what? I can't believe I've come up with this theory, but it actually explains LA. It's like LA, people are never happy. They're constantly grasping for more. And it's because these are the fuckers that just weren't happy with any stop on the crossway.
It's funny you say that. I had a good conversation about 10 years ago, and it was can't remember who was talking to at the time, but they compared Galway to LA, and I suppose Galway is one of the furthest west cities you can go to in Ireland, but they would call Galway the graveyard of ambition.
Why?
And there was,
I'm trying to think. I go to what are the Star Wars islands?
Skellig Islands.
Yeah. So my friend weirdly, Harry, lives just at the Port McGee, just opposite the Skelligs, which very weirdly is where Marconi laid the first transatlantic cable. My other friend Pete, who I did happy hour with, just very weirdly lives at the other end in Newfoundland. So that's like,
wow,
to have 2 friends who live at both ends, very weird. But why Galway? Like, do people in Ireland move thinking I'm getting closer to America, or what?
Well, I think that, like, for me, a bit of background on me. I was born in Merseyside to Irish parents, and then when I was just a week shy of turning 13, moved to Ireland, and I started school on my 13th birthday. Then I went, I had to, like, learn a whole new culture.
Were you full Scouse when you were in Ireland?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I came from the Wirral, which is, just the posh part.
Yeah.
Where all the footballers live.
But how quickly did you drop your accent?
Oh, I didn't. Like, I had to. It was when I came to Sweden, I had to soften the accent so people could understand what I was saying.
I love
and
that.
then my sister as well she kind of gave me some elocution lessons, because she was in LIPA, and she was in the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts. She was doing acting. So she was like, no, you don't say thing, it's thing. So, like,
was this Pete Maloney?
It's Pete Maloney. This was about, I was about 14 or 15. But she was, herself and my brother-in-law were really big cultural influences on me. They'd be watching The Word, Terry Christian, and now it's just a crank on Twitter.
He is a crank on Twitter, isn't he? I know.
I have a theory about Galway, though, which is that when Cromwell invaded in 1641, he gave people a choice, which was, right, we want all the good land, so to hell or to Connacht, right? Basically, so fuck off to the west if you don't want to live here. So basically,
I'm trying to think where Galway is. You go up from Cork towards the Skelligs. Where's Galway?
A quicker way of doing it is if you just go directly straight west from Dublin.
But that's pretty much where I went, to Port McGee. Yeah, so it's there.
Well, it'd be about 2 hours north of Port McGee, I'd say.
Oh, okay. Is that worse? Because Port McGee is fucking beautiful.
Well, no, it's Galway's fine. Like, it's a fantastic city. But what I meant by that is people end up there, and it's a student town. So you go there. Like, when I was like 19, that was peak Galway. 19 to, I suppose, 25, and then people would start moving away. And it's the kind of place where you'd never think of, like, getting a hotel. You'd be like, oh, or like a hostel. You'd be like, oh, there's someone we know tenuously who will let us, like, sleep on their floor, and we slummed it a lot. But
so if you're in Galway over 30, you fucked up, because it's like being in Canada. If you haven't moved to America by 30, it's not happening.
I think that kind of leads us.
I can't bear it. Like, if I ever get in charge of anything, come the revolution, the first thing up against the wall is personalised number plates. And if your personalised number plates involve 007, you're front of the queue in the fucking firing squad.
Yeah, I never understood like my uncle always had them, and
it's a way of saying I'm doing well. And if you've got a nice house but no one ever comes to see it, I get it. A car, you're driving around saying, "Look at me, I'm doing well," and I'm being snobby in a way. I get that. I get, people. You want people to know you're doing all right. It's fine. I don't get it, but it's just, I don't know. I never understand it. I hate logos. I hate flashy watches. I'm just like, I fucking hate that shit. But then I also hate. I saw a thing with Louis Theroux recently, and he was going on about how he had the same Casio watch cost £8 for 30 years.
One of them.
No, like proper, like. And it was almost purposefully the other way. It was almost like, I am so non-materialistic. It's like no one fucking buys an £8 Casio watch. Like, come on.
No.
Yeah,
like if you see street sweepers in Milan, they all have Ray-Bans.
Yeah.
It's this weird thing that they have.
Yeah.
I think Louis Theroux is a bit of a, I'm very wholesome though. And, he comes across as someone who's very disarming. But like, I don't know.
It's very weird with Louis Theroux, because he and I kind of got famous at the same time. And I loved his stuff. And we had a very weird lunch in 2001. And my big thing was, are you, because his big skill is being all a bit naive, and does that disarm people? And I'm like, are you actually like that? And it's funny because he had a meeting with me, and he and I are very similar backgrounds and stuff. So you don't need to do it. And he was exactly like that. I think he's someone who's done something, a shtick, for so long that he's actually become the shtick. It's very weird when someone does like a comedy laugh for a bit, and then you suddenly think, "Fuck, I actually laugh like that."
Or Ziggy Stardust or the Thin White Duke or someone. He become fused with the mask in some way.
Yeah, except I don't think Theroux's done quite the amount of narcotics Bowie did, but
no, not
it's
really.
It's quite interesting.
I remember meeting Adam and Joe once in Trinity College.
Great conversation. I love this.
They were
at school with Louis Theroux, you know that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because I mentioned about that scene where they did, if they went to that pound shop and said, if you break it, you pay for it, and they were just like breaking things, and apparently that was Louis Theroux who came up with that idea.
Yeah, no, I mean that year at Westminster School was fucking extraordinary. It had Adam and Joe, 2 members of Faithless, Dido's brother. It had Louis Theroux. It had Nick Clegg. It had. I mean, it was like, fuck me. Did anyone fuck up at that school? It's like, it was very odd. Yeah.
Is Westminster School? Is it got a well-to-do school, or is it just a?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's one of the most. Westminster's very interesting because it's as expensive as Eton and Harrow, but it's not for old landed gentry. It's for kind of switched on city kids, which is why they all went into media rather than like voting Brexit and killing foxes.
Yeah. I remember once, speaking of the Square Mile and the kind of mindset you get around like Liverpool Street, about 8 years ago, I was walking through London. I saw this like blonde guy wearing a pink shirt, like chinos, just walked past me, went, "Wanker," like this. I was like, what the fuck? And then another time I was all dressed up. You
probably thought you're on your way to super glue yourself to the Bank of England. Which actually, you probably were.
But it's a funny old spot, the Square Mile around Liverpool Street. There was another time. Do you ever hear of Hedonism Wines in? I think it's in Mayfair.
Oh yeah.
I was invited to an event there through my sister, and the guy Evgeny Chichvarkin, his name is. He had Everset, which is like the biggest mobile phone provider in Russia, and he had to get out of Russia with his head down in a cab with his passport and then fly the family over. So his backstory was he was a billionaire exiled to the UK, and he was like, what am I supposed to do with all my wealth? So he opened this extravagant wine shop, and we were drinking wine from like 20 years before I was born, and
it's like wine extracted from the anus of someone that sunk in the Titanic.
The anus of Zeus.
Zeus's anus. I think I've drunk that wine.
I was going to say, on the way there, I was going from Shoreditch to I think it's Mayfair, and I was wearing like a suit jacket with a waistcoat and a tie, and I had the hair kind of gelled. Someone goes, "Oh, someone's going out for dinner."
Yeah, someone's got electricity at home.
had a guy, the other day called Abby from India who was reading my palms, and I was like, yeah, all this palm reading, it's all fucking quackery. But he said, like, it was, yes, and it seems that you should have really made it big, but maybe your partner stopped this. And I was like, well, that sounds a bit right. Just talk about moving me to another country where I'm completely unknown.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I was saying about stand up. I was like, yes, I could do stand up in Ireland, but I just can't. Like, I'm gonna basically have to start from the very bottom.
Yeah.
And when you do stand up in Sweden, it's like they just enjoy sitting there and making you sweat.
Yeah.
There was this one time where I was invited to come on for this Paddy's Day thing, and this guy Yemi from Harlem is like, "Oh man, it's gonna be off the hook, honestly." And I was like, "Oh yeah,
The moment someone
cool."
says that, you know it's going to be shite. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what the difference was? It was the same dowdy faces, but this time they were wearing oversized novelty Guinness top hats,
Oh no.
and they were just it was just a fucking the most depressing things ever. Like
You're not funny.
Although you
yeah, and we're
did
proud of it.
you did do anti stand up at one point as was it
Good.
Charles Goond?
Yeah. So that one of the
You
things
read all the
about-
numbers.
Actually, it's very weird now looking at that, because right at the beginning, that was just as Trigger Happy was kind of happening, and everyone, you know, I was a comedian, but I'd never done stand up. Never. I don't know if I'd been. No, I'd never been interested in stand up. I just knew that I could do this thing I was doing. Why would I do stand up? And in the same way that why would a stand up come and, you know, you couldn't just take a stand up and do what I do, and I couldn't be a stand up. But it became a real issue of, like, people would say, well, you're a comedian, so you can get on stage, do 20 minutes. Like, of course I fucking can't. I have, you know, no idea. It's my worst fear is going up as myself. And I kind of, that was probably an early Freudian nod, that when I was filming Trigger Happy, and I found that we were very close, our office, to the Comedy Store, and the Comedy Store said, oh, just come and do whatever you want. So I just thought my fear of stand up is obviously going on, and it's the anxiety of just like dying on stage. I thought, what if my actual fear was being funny? Like, I totally reversed it. And so they said, you can go on for 10 minutes. And I went on, no idea what I was going to do. I dressed up, no offense, like a Scouse fucking car thief. I had a big nose and like curly hair. And I went on and I fucking loved it. Like, because what was amazing is you realize that everyone goes to a comedy show and they're looking for the clever thing. So I'd go something like, who came here in a car? And everyone goes, yay. Who's here from Swindon? Yay. And they think, oh, this is great. This is building to something really clever. And then I just kept going. And then eventually they were like, fuck, this is going nowhere. Like, who has a car here?
It was like watching Noel Fielding stand up.
Yeah, well, so, but Noel Fielding's more, I've never seen Noel live, but he's more proper surrealism. Mine was anti-stand-up, really. It was that terrible word, punk. But I don't know. I just kind of, I think because I couldn't do it, I thought I'd destroy it. But actually, I got a real buzz when I was up there, because I actually enjoyed the antagonism. I like an argument. And actually, that's where the poetry cafe came in Trigger Happy, where I went to some girl took me to a poetry cafe. And I was like, this is utter fucking nonsense. And you realize that actually you couldn't just say, look, I'm sorry, dude, but this is shit. Because we're English, you can't say that. And so I just thought, if I stood up and started reading a poem, and I had a big fucking wad of papers, and it's like, this is my poem called 7 Million. And I start reading 1, 2, 3. How far do you go? And I got to 786.
That's what amazes me, because they like, you know, in the beginning it felt like they sensed it was building to something like a payoff, and then they realized that you're just actually literally reading to 7 million, let's say.
So actually, that was interesting, because to me it went through several layers, because it started, and that's where actually poetry, modern poetry and stand-up kind of fused. Because when I started, you could sense something, aha, he's saying 7 million and he's making us think he's going to 7 million, but there's going to be a clever twist on the poetry at 100 or something. They waited to 100, and then I see him thinking, no, maybe it's 200. He's postmodern. When he got to 300, they were like, fucking hell. And then they suddenly thought, fuck, if we complain, what if this suddenly turns out to be the greatest poem in history? So it's all bluff.